Hello, everybody. Welcome back to, well, it might be your first time, but welcome to the Kochi University Center for Asian Studies webinar for spring 2021. Today, we have Professor Elda Kuchuk-Gyalchin. He was here last week as well, and this is part of his two-part seminar on Japanese samurai class and Bushido, the way of the samurai. So let me very briefly introduce him, maybe a shortened version of the introduction from last week. So Dr. Erdal Kuchuk-Gyalchin has completed his PhD at KUASIA University, Department of History in the field of Japanese history. And he's currently giving lectures at the Asian Studies Center at KUASIA and on various subjects, including Asian history and Japanese management techniques and know-how. And he's also the founder of the Musashi Dojo, a school of creative leadership at the Japanese Art Center, where he also teaches Shodo, Japanese calligraphy, in combination with Bushido, the way of samurai. And Dr. Kuchuk-Gyalchin is also the author of many books. I'm not going to list all of them today, but this includes the most recent one, which was published in 2021, entitled Miyamoto Musashi and the Book of Five Rings on Art of War and Leadership. And I believe today's subject may be related to that book as well. And to the title of today's talk is Bushido, the Way of the Samurai and the Book of Five Rings. So with that, Dr. Kuchuk-Gyalchin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today too. We had a very enjoyable talk last week, and today I'm looking forward to start telling, about Bushido. I hope our listeners will enjoy and have, let's say, a hint of the world of the samurai, hopefully. So I would like to share my presentation, if you allow me. So maybe you would like to enable me for screen sharing.
Oh, yes, let me. Yes, I think you'll be able to do that now.
I think it's here. And okay, well, yep, that's it. First of all, well, I would like to start with my own journey in a way, because today's talk is not specific on the topic of history or historical development of the samurai class, which we have already completed in the first half of this series. Today we will talk more about the worldview of the samurai and their mindset. The term Bushido is already famous and popular throughout the world, and well, in most of the times it's used in the context of martial arts. But I believe it is not limited to the martial arts. It is a way of thinking that can be used and was used in many different areas, like business too. That's why in KUASIA I sometimes give the course on the Japanese management techniques and know-how, because it shows us, I believe, the way of thinking of the Japanese businesses, which in turn I also believe that they were heavily influenced by these ideas that we will talk today. My own journey started when I was in secondary school, I guess. I don't really remember which day or which date it was, but somehow I had this idea that I want to learn more about Japan. And what I wanted to learn was how this Asian nation, could manage to succeed, to develop, and create many brands in many fields. So that question, I don't know, maybe possibly because of the newly arriving animations, Japanese animations. One of them was called Candy Candy. I still can remember the tune and the melody of it. I don't know. Maybe because my father had brought a colorful book about the contemporary Japan, modern Japan, somehow, or it was popular in those days. I mean, people were wondering what Japan was like and how it became a developed nation and etc. Maybe it's a mixture of all those, but somehow I had from an early period of my life, I had this idea, this let's say drive to learn more about Japan. And then I was lucky because when I entered into university, I had in mind to learn more about the economical development of Japan. So I decided purposefully, consciously, the Department of Economics. And I entered into Boğaziçi University with the specific idea, specific purpose of learning more about Japan's economy. So you can imagine how happy and how surprised I was when I learned upon my entry into the university that for the first time in the history of university, an elective, a language elective on Japanese language was opened. So you can imagine that I was the first student in front of the teacher. I would like to, pronounce her name, Mariko Erdogan. I'm so indebted to her. And I was the first student in the Japanese elective language in Boğaziçi University. And then after 1 or 2 years, I had the chance to receive a scholarship from an unexpected source, that is a local bank in Shimonoseki, which happens to be the city, which was the sister city of Istanbul. Now, many people don't know it, but after the hanging bridge over Bosphorus was built in 1973, somebody thought that the Straits is something that binds the two cities, so the two cities became sister cities. But nobody remembered that until I received that scholarship and went to Shimonoseki and stayed there for 1 year and studied development economics, especially focused on what Japanese economical history tells us about the country's development. So you can imagine how happy I was. I had the chance to live there and experience, different, let's say, facades of Japanese culture, and meet with many people, etc. And my Japanese also developed, I think. And then, gradually I realized that if I wanted to learn more about the reasons of development of Japan, I had to look more into history. So nothing is without a cause. Nothing is without a reason. I started realizing that I had to know more about history. So after a long while, after graduation from the university and working with the Japanese people and companies, and living there for a while for a theme park project called Kashiwazaki Culture Town and etc. I mean, I had the chance to work with Japanese in various fields and from various echelons of society, and I realized then that I have to focus more on history. That's why I came back to academia after a long while of about more than 10 years or almost 13, 14 years of professional work. I came back to academia, to Boğaziçi University, and I started studying history. And I focused on the samurai because I had the idea that if I could understand the samurai, I could have a better understanding of that development, that question, the answer I was looking for. So my dissertation in the master's degree was well, its topic was a comparison between the warrior classes of Turkey, Ottoman Empire, that is Janissaries, and the samurai, the way of thinking, the way of living, and how they were organized, and how they were promoted, the organizational system, and etc. There, again, gradually, I started realizing, new discoveries along the way, that I have to know more about the way of thinking. That's why in my PhD, I focused on Buddhism, and not exactly on the samurai during my PhD, but in order to understand a large portion of Japanese society, I took the topic of Shin Buddhism, which is the largest denomination of Buddhism in Japan, as you already know. So my PhD dissertation brought me to a point that I have to know more about the mindset if I want to understand the history and the economy development. So I arrived at a point that I have to know more about philosophy, the way of thinking. And that's the point when I met Miyamoto Musashi and his book, The Book of Five Rings. This book and the, let's say, Bushido concept suddenly started shedding light on the questions I was asking myself, and I was looking for in the books and archives and etc. And I read the book from various translations, but also from Gendai Goyaku, that's the contemporary, the modern Japanese translations of the text. And I came to the conclusion that I have to share my knowledge, what I have discovered in this book, in the pages of this book, with my people, because I'm an idealist. I was an idealist, and my generation was raised idealist. I don't know. I don't see the same kind of attitude in my students these days. I mean, they come to my Japanese translation classes with, I love anime and I want to read more manga, and I'm interested in the kawaii culture. Or some of them come just, I had to take a second elective, sensei, professor, please, let me take your class, and etc. So mine was different than, the youngsters today, I believe. Anyhow, this idealist background forced me to take on a difficult challenge, if I may say, of translating a 17th century text. I had to look for the right text. I searched archives and, looked for different translations and other texts. And I finally found, which I believe is the best compilation of his book at the Harima Research Association on Miyamoto Musashi. These are mainly amateur, but very, let's say, talented people on texts. They had come together and they found the right text, which is available at the moment to the researchers. So I had to deal with the 17th century Japanese, and I came up with a translation which I managed to publish well, before the pandemic, a year before the pandemic. That's so about more than 2 years now. You know, I was surprised that people were interested in what's written by Miyamoto Musashi, and the book was sold out in a few months. So just after that pandemic entered, and I had to, I wanted to publish it again, but you know, the situation was not that good, so I had to wait. And while waiting, I worked on different additional texts that belong to Miyamoto Musashi, and I also translated Dokkodo, well, I will talk about it a little bit at the end of this webinar, but Dokkodo, which can be translated as the way to uniqueness, the 21 precepts of uniqueness, if you may call it, and also the 35 principles of Bushido, etc. So I tried to compile all texts that are related with and about him and translate them, and you know, form an extended edition of the Book of Five Rings that I have wrote, and it just came out of the print house about a week ago. So you can imagine how happy I am. So I'm trying to give speeches and webinars and you know, seminars in order to tell what he was trying to say. So let's start. I will start with, let's say, different facades of Japanese, let's say, culture as a, you know, smooth entry into our subject, because I'm sure that our listeners, most of our listeners, especially if they have come to listen to this webinar, they must have heard different ways and different traits and different parts of Japanese culture somehow. For example, the first one I showed, the Japanese art, or ikebana, or the way of the tea, the tea ceremonies, or Fujisan, the sacred mountain in Japan. Or they must, if they haven't heard the others, I'm sure they have heard the word sushi. And then, I don't know if they're aware that they're Japanese in origin, but it's so internationalized now, that's why. But there is Aikido, there is Iaido, there is Kendo, there is Karate, you name it. There are many other, let's say, martial arts traditions that originated from Japan and Japanese culture. And now they belong to the world. I mean, there are dojos in United States, in Canada, in Brazil, you name it, in France, I'm sure in Kenya, in South Africa, you name it. In almost all countries, you may find some sort of martial art that belongs to Japanese culture. And also some other brands, like, you know, industrial brands, Suzuki, Toyota, Sony, Kikoman, Toshiba, Honda. I'm sure they're familiar with these names, and many others that we already know or might have heard, or famous in other countries, if not in Turkey, like these many technological, like Nintendo. They're not so healthy these days, but you know, Nintendo is there. It's another brand, popular brand. There is Panasonic, there is Canon, there is Nikon, there is YKK. They have a factory in Turkey, by the way. There is Yamaha, and we have an image of a samurai. I don't know the very young listeners that joined us today, but you know, many of us are familiar with the popular Hollywood movie called The Last Samurai. And there is an image that is depicted in that movie and other similar movies on the samurai. Well, when I was, much younger, let's say, I don't know, I don't want to accept that I'm not young. So when I was younger, there was a TV drama called Shogun, and many of us, watched it on TV. And, the Seven Samurai, Akira Kurosawa's movies, and The Last Samurai once again. Tom Cruise was the, hero there. And there are games like Soul of Samurai and, many others. I cannot name all of them, of course. There are so many. And such games, and the image is there, samurai. And it's samurai is such a popular icon that you can see not necessarily Japanese people, but from all corners of the world, people, the designers, they create and recreate the image of the samurai as a mighty warrior. And even there are projections to the future, like the Gundam series or many others. I mean, it's so creatively, positively promoting the image of samurai. So, how was it possible? How, I mean, the question is there. How did Japan create so many brands that left their mark in our heads, even if we are not that interested in Japanese culture, from all corners of the world? This question is there, and its answer is interesting because it has the potential to give us a kind of outline, a roadmap, both personally and as a society, that it has this potential to give us this, let's say, roadmap, as I said, leading to success, to create a brand in that sense. Because like the other words, like samurai itself, the word samurai, I mean, almost nobody in the world knows the word janissary, even if they know the knight. Or very few people, except the scholars, know about the immortals of Persian Empire, or the Hippais of the Alexandrian army, or the Keshig of the Mongolian Genghis Khan's guard army. But many people know the samurai. And again, the image of the samurai, or the adjectives or the qualities that are attributed to the image of samurai are, whomever you ask, they will come up with these answers: disciplined, fighting spirit, respected, let's say, mighty warriors with swordsmanship, high level of swordsmanship, etc. So these are the qualities of the brand of samurai. And how it was created by the samurai themselves. Last week we talked a little bit about the Japanese modernization during the Meiji era, the Meiji Restoration. But the modernizers of Japan, don't forget, they were the samurai. They came from samurai origin. And they have this mindset, which is called Bushido, or there are other names too, but mainly it's the Bushido or Budo, the way of the samurai, the way of the warrior, or the way of martial arts or martial way of thinking, or the way of strategy, if you like, or art of war. Many such words are used for that. Now, let's continue with our slide. So Bushido is written with Bu, that means martial arts or war or weapons and everything related to military affairs. Shi is gentleman. So Bushi is the warrior. We simplify it and call it a warrior, but there are two parts of it. One is military arts, art of war, and the second is gentleman. So this gives us an image that is already there when the image of samurai was in the process of created. And Do, just like karate do, kendo, Iaido, or other dos, or Taoism, it's the same. It means the way. So the way of the samurai, the way of the warrior. When we talk about Bushido, we talk about two things, basically. One of them is art of war or strategy, and the second one is leadership. Don't forget, the Japanese society during the 250 years, almost two and a half centuries, let's say, was a secluded society. It was isolated from the world, more or less, with some few exceptions like the Dutch and the Korean embassies and Chinese embassies every now and then, but it was shut to the world. And in that era, Pax Tokugawa, we see the development of these ideas, because the samurai, gradually becoming bureaucrats themselves, were thinking more and more about the reasons why they exist with their two swords on their belly. And they came up with various ideas. One of them, the strongest, I believe, is the Book of Five Rings, because it tells us how a warrior should be, should exist. And there are other books like Hagakure, the one that was written by another samurai, Yamamoto Tsunetomo, but I find his book more Confucian in the sense that it tries to give the principles how a samurai should live according to Confucian principles. But here in the Book of Five Rings, we find the core of warriorship, the core of the heart of the warrior, how he should exist. Now, during the Tokugawa period, the society was divided into four solid castes, about not as much that castes in the Indian sense, but social classes. And the social class that was on the top of the echelons was the samurai, the warrior class. So they always felt the responsibility to lead the society, to keep the society on track, the right track. I mean, that may change in time, but or according to the person who was thinking about it. But anyhow, they believed that there is a right way of living, and the samurai should be the models of the way of right living rightly. So they came up with new concepts. We will talk about them. But leadership is there. They felt that they had to lead the society. They had their privileges, but they have their responsibility of leading the society. Now, the first book that introduced Bushido, or the way of the warrior, to the West, to the world for that matter, was written by a person, a Japanese national who lived in United States, called Nitobe Inazo. And in 1900, he published this book, Bushido. I think his book lies at the core of the image of the samurai that we see, that we come across in the world nowadays. He put the foundations, he's the founder of the image of the samurai as a knightly, professional warrior. I think it was a wise move because he had learned, he had studied his knighthood, I mean, the Western way of warrior worldview, let's say, and he established very strong bonds by comparison, by comparing the samurai with the Western knights. So it was accepted. It was welcomed by the Western society, and the image of samurai became positive. According to Nito Beinazo, there were 7 characteristics of the Bushido. There were 7 main, principles of Bushido, and we find that all around the world. When we talk about Bushido, many dojos, the people who are interested in, who deal with martial arts, who are practitioners of martial arts, they always use these 7 principles, let's say. It says justice, gi, the first, bravery, yu, benevolence, jin, veracity. These are taken from, popular usage of the translations. And politeness, rei, honor, meio, loyalty, chugi. So while I was translating the text, of course, I had, read the text of Nito Beinazo, but I had trouble in, locating these 7 principles in Bushido. I mean, these are the concepts that is created, and this is introduced as the pillars of Bushido by Nito Beinazo. I have no objection to that. But when I look more and more into the depths of samurai history, I realized that there are alternative explanations for the keywords that should represent Bushido. Now, because I believe there are also translation problems in understanding these characters, these kanji characters too. Now, I came to the conclusion that we have to focus more on the Confucian virtues, the 5 Confucian virtues of a leader that is called the 5 constants, or the Gojo. This is a concept that is used by, from the early periods of Japanese history, even during the introduction of the Ritsuryo system, the laws and regulations of 7th and 8th centuries that shaped Japanese society and caused a centralized state to form. There we find court caps system, which is called the 12 cap system. There we find already find these keywords, the 5 constants. Now, these 5 constants are that Confucius requires, and later on other thinkers, Chinese thinkers mainly, they developed these ideas. But it was the conception, the development of these ideas and crystallization of these ideas was in Japan. Don't forget that. I mean, Japanese society might have borrowed many cultural or philosophical concepts from China, but they have perfected and they have adopted them in accordance with their own needs, and they have kept them I mean, I sometimes think that Japan is a safety box of culture. They after they, they receive certain cultural, let's say, developments, they keep it and they perfect it there. Now, empathy is the first of the 5 virtues of a leader. If you remember the previous slide, the translation was, if I'm not mistaken, it was compassion or something. Just a moment. Okay. It's here, benevolence. Sometimes they've translated as compassion. But if you look into the construction of the kanji itself, you will find out there is men, human being. This stands for man, and the other is 2. So to be able to stand for the other person too, to go into the shoes of the other person, you can understand it like that too. And I like to translate this word as empathy. It doesn't exclude not necessarily the compassion translation of it, but at the core of the meaning, I find empathy. Secondly, this is generally translated as justice, but I believe morality is the right word for this kanji, because gi is, when we talk about gi, we talk about the universal right and wrong. I mean, it is related to justice, of course, but it doesn't necessarily have to be with justice itself. It's more than that. It's about morality. It is about knowing what's right and wrong. So Confucius explicitly seems to want the leaders to be able to differentiate between what is wrong and what is right in all circumstances. That is morality or ethics. The third one is manners or etiquette, if you like. So a leader should always know how to act and behave in all circumstances. That's why we see the samurai or the Japanese. When we talk about Japanese culture, we see respect to each other and to them, to one's own self. I don't know if our listeners remember that, but several years ago there was this World Soccer Championship in Brazil, and the Japanese people were photographed, and it was a news for the world that the Japanese spectators, after their national team's match was over, they started cleaning up the whole place where they sat, and the whole world looked like with admiration on one hand, but on the other hand, nobody tried to copy them and start cleaning their own areas. It was only the Japanese. So this is taught. This is reigi, or this is when they use reigi, the ritualistic, the ceremonial part of behaving. This is because you respect yourself, not only the other. So to know the manners shows that you are elegant enough. It shows your elegance, elegant enough to to behave as you should. So in the samurai world, this is key. If you don't know how to behave in an environment that you have already entered, it means that you cannot, as they say in Japanese, you cannot read the air. Yeah, read the air. They literally call it to reading the air. That means you have to be sensitive enough when you go into a new environment or a grouping or a room, you name it, a meeting. You have to realize what is important, whose let's say position is what in comparison with others, and etc. You know, you have to read the air and use appropriate attitudes towards your counterparts. This is manners. This is etiquette. The fourth principle or virtue is knowledge. Knowledge. As you may remember, we didn't see it in the other list that is put forward by Nito Beinazo, but knowledge is a center, the core of a leader in Confucian virtues. Now, knowledge leads to wisdom. A leader should know, try to know, and try to learn. Without knowledge, you're nothing. You have to learn. That's why we will see that this word will come again in front of us, knowledgeable. So without knowledge, you will not improve yourself. Without let's say, an appetite for knowledge. And finally, the final virtue is both a culmination and product of the other four, and also a virtue in itself. And it is really important. It is trust. But you have to take the meaning of this kanji a bit widely, because it is not only trusting somebody, but it's also about self-confidence. So if you do the previous four, if you follow these virtues, if you have them, if you try to have them, finally, the end, as an end, you will come to a point that people will trust you, but you will also trust yourself. You will radiate trust to others. Now, I would like to take your attention to the point that these five virtues also the characteristics of a branding, whatever you have in your mind. It may be a service, it may be a product, it may be a country name, it may be an image of a certain social class, doesn't matter. You construct trust. Because if you look deeper into this kanji, you will find out it is separated into two. The first half is the same as the first one, as you may realize, this one, and it means men, not necessarily, genderly men. It is, you take it as human being, let's say, men. And the other one is word coming out of mouth. These lines are what comes out from one's mouth. So this is word. One who stands behind his or her word. So keeping your word is essential in building trust. That's why I believe now, well, after realizing these facts, I come to know, I feel like I understand better why Japanese people are so keen on keeping time. I never saw, let me tell you, I never, if there isn't, a really big thing that, that keeps them not being able to keep their promise, but I almost never saw a Japanese person being late to his or her appointment. And interestingly enough, the more they go higher up in the echelons of the society, I mean, they become more errai, let's say, they become more and more on the leading positions of the society, like CEOs and presidents of large companies and etc. They keep it more, believe me. They come at least 5 or 10 minutes before their appointment. You know why? Because they know that it's a whole. What I mean by a whole is that the larger picture that you give to people, to other people, is composed of smaller, consistent components. So detail is important because the larger picture is composed of small details coming together perfectly, hopefully, at the end. So a Japanese person may think, if you're from the Middle East, I see I see people here too. I mean, maybe because we are from Mediterranean, we have hot blood, or we are, emotional people. I don't know. You may come up with many reasons for that, but we are not that keen about keeping our time. But keeping your time is keeping your promise. If you keep your promise, you are trusted. If you're trusted, when you do, people come after you. So you can lead, you can be a leader. So let's go. Another key concept in understanding Bushido is Chigyo Goitsu. It literally means unity of knowledge and action. It is another Confucian, let's say, concept, but it was central to the samurai life. What we mean by knowledge and action, well, it's obvious on the one hand, but for the samurai, it meant that you have to increase your knowledge in all fields of living. I mean, in arts and etc., in your own craft, etc. But it is not enough for the samurai. I mean, it's a Confucian, as I said, principle, but it is perfected. It is more respected. It is more popularized in the Japanese society, especially during the Tokugawa period. It is so popular that we find in the documents of those times when they write about the salaries, the incomes of the samurai, they use the word chigyo daka. Chigyo daka. That means the amount of your chigyo or chiko. That is the unity of knowledge and action. So the value of what you do as a samurai is calculated with your knowledge and action. I mean, it is symbolical, but it's meaningful. So a person, a leader, should be knowledgeable, but if he or she doesn't take action with that knowledge, it means that he or she does not necessarily know what she or he pretends or claims to know. So knowledge, scholarship in that sense, or academia, if go further and further, the more you know, the less you act most of the times. But this in the samurai world is different. They value action as much as they do knowledge. Another keyword of this era, or Bushido for that matter, is Bunbu Ryodo, the double way of the arts of war and peace. What I mean by that is that a samurai should know, of course, should for sure know his craft, that is strategy, art of war. He should learn sword fencing. He should master other martial arts, say archery or Aikido, or you name it. I mean, other fields that were available then, especially Iaido, using sword fencing, swordsmanship. But it is not enough to master. To become a master, you have to cultivate culture. Bun Buryodo, this kanji stands for culture or arts. That's why I call arts of peace. Huh? It is a unison. It should act simultaneously. It should exist together, according to the samurai. We see this keyword in many documents and in many texts prepared by the samurai writers. So in order to excel in your craft, you have to know arts too. You have to be able to enjoy, let's say, pottery, let's say tea ceremony, let's say sumie painting or calligraphy. Because with that, you attain a deeper sensitivity, which is a must to know, to realize the unseen for a warrior. What I mean is that before the threat appears and manifests itself, you have to have the ability, the talent to realize that it's coming, so that you can prepare yourself and take your precaution. So that makes you a master of Bushido. Now, okay, well, we finally came to Miyamoto Musashi. He is the most famous icon, if you like it, of a samurai for the Japanese society and the world now. We will understand why. Now, he was born in 1584 and he died in 1645. And he's so popular that he's depicted in many forms of art in Japan. Not only today, we will see contemporary modern usages too, but for example, like this one in the woodblock prints of the late Tokugawa or Meiji periods too. He is shown as a samurai fighting against all kinds of weird creatures and monsters and etc. He always comes victorious from his endeavors, enterprises, fighting against another beast. Again, another woodblock print showing him. This is a modern depiction of Miyamoto Musashi. There are many examples of such enterprises to portray him as an ideal warrior, and adapting that image in accordance with the needs of each generation, if you may. This is a modern and a recent one, and that's another one. And many Japanese movies take him as the hero. Many dramas, portray him. And always the most popular or strong actors in acting, and even in animes, in animations, you find different versions of Miyamoto Musashi as the ideal warrior. How did he become like that? Well, for example, this is a woodblock print from from the let's say 19th century, and you see him fighting, dueling against a famous swordsman, another master called Sasaki Kojiro, and he's shown as flying in the air using his two swords, because he's famous for founding his own school of fighting called Niten Ichi Ryu, which means two. Well, if you look at the translators into English, they would say um, two skies, one, Niten Ichi. But I translate his école, his school, as two worlds as one, two worlds one. He means that there's unity between two worlds. I mean, death and life, and day and night, and small sword and a large sword, a long sword, etc. He's saying, he's giving a message there. So he's holding two swords together. Normally, Japanese sword, katana, is used by both hands. But his teaching is different than that. He says in his book, the Book of Five Rings, he says, if you carry two swords on your belly, then you should be able to use both of them. Otherwise, what is the reason of carrying two swords on your belly? So he's shown as an exceptional fighter using his two swords together. Well, at the end of this fight, actually, this is a historical fight, and it really did happen. And actually, when I was there, I didn't know that. Let me confess you. When I was in Shimonoseki, the town that I went for the first time in Japan and stayed there for 1 year, as I told you at the start of this talk, that town, that is the sister city of Istanbul, hosts this very spot, the famous spot called Ganryujima, the Ganryu Island, where this took place. Actually, you see, this scene is immortalized with a sculpture there, idealized, images of the two, and you can see that here he is holding a large, a long piece of wood, a wooden stick in his hand. And I mean, the first one, the woodblock print, was more idealized, but here you can see a bit, let's say, realistic depiction of the scene, because we know that Miyamoto Musashi had purposefully been purposefully late to the appointment, which is in contrast with what I have said, by the way. But he did do that because he had a point. He was late for about 2 or 3 hours in order to make his opponent, who was masterful and who was famous, and he was a mighty opponent, to make him nervous, and and to make him angry, so that he wouldn't be balanced when the fight started. So this has a message, and in it, a silent, a hidden message that Musashi always likes to give, also in his texts too. What he means by this coming late is the fight starts the moment you decide, not at the battlefield. He says you can fight as much as you prepare. So the process to the leading to the fight is as important, or even more important, than the battle itself. The victorious general comes to the battlefield already have won his victory by his meticulous hard work and practice and knowledge and experience and preparation, for that matter. So preparation is the main thing in Bushido. And Musashi tells him. So he had carved out a long wooden stick and used it as a weapon in this duel. On the other hand, his opponent is using a real katana, so a blade, but he was famous for using a little bit longer than standard katana. So he was making he was taking the advantage of a longer katana, but by carving a wooden weapon while he was late, 2 or 3 hours from the oar of his little boat, longer than his. So this is all strategy for Musashi. Now, he is an interesting person. He is some personality that we may call a Renaissance man in that sense, because he has given, let's say, products in various fields, and he had excelled in various crafts. Musashi, as a swords master, he is known as a swords master because he has established, as I said, a strong tradition, a strong school of sword fencing that is called Emmei-ryu, school of Emmei, or the Niten Ichi, the two worlds one school, which still continues, by the way, as a tradition, as a koryu, an old tradition of martial arts in Japan. He is a calligrapher. He has given few but excellent masterpieces of writing. For example, here he has written Senki, that means fighting spirit. But his brush strokes are strong and reveals his character and, decisive attitude to his actions. But it doesn't finish. Let's continue. He's an artist. He's a Sumiya artist who has given brilliant pieces of art. This is also his. Or little bird, famous for this little bird hanging almost in air. Or this. Or this. He's a designer. He has designed this saddle. He has designed this, let's say, sword or scabbard. He's a sculptor. Very few examples, but perfect examples. For example, here he has depicted Fudo Myo, the enlightened, immovable king. Well, a Buddhist icon of warriors, or let's say, guardians of the world. Well, that's another discussion, but there is this 5 great kings of wisdom in Buddhism. So he is aware of the content of that doctrine, and he has depicted in wood. He is a garden designer. I mean, I took only 2 examples, but these are designed by Miyamoto Musashi, and they boasted still. He also was a city planner, urban planner, and he helped design the Akashi Castle and Akashi City in cooperation with the local daimyo, the feudal lord. So he is also a thinker, a thinker, because he has left us with the wonderful text, the powerful text of the Gorinsho, the Book of 5 Rings. I have translated, as I said, a few years ago, and this is the first cover into Turkish, but he's translated in many languages, almost all languages in the world. There were some, earlier translations into Turkish, but they were secondary translations. So they were translated from English or French or from other languages, which I find it, useful attempts if nobody can do it from the original. But many things were lost in translation, honestly. because it is a prejudice, common prejudice, which is not, groundless, because the English-speaking, native English speakers, they're, quicker in finding good texts and translating them to English. Okay, but they don't necessarily have to be correct in all sorts of translations, because I know it from my classes. When you give a certain small text, even in a haiku, to a translator, and if you have 40 students, let's say, they come up with different translations. So translations have to be filtered, or naturally filtered, by the translator's experience and knowledge. So the more you know about the history of the samurai, the more you know about the worldview and martial arts, if you have done the martial arts yourself, all enhance your translation. In most of the cases, we don't see that. We see a command of the language, Japanese and English in that sense, and then some parts are lost in that process when translating into English. And a secondary translation, you can imagine how much was lost again. So for many years, Musashi's text was regarded as unintelligible in Turkish. It was so complex, it is not understandable. It is so strict and rigid, and it simply did not make sense. So if you remember, I said I was an idealist and I was looking for the answer of Japan's development, and I came up with this answer, and I found finally the answer, and it is the Book of Five Rings, and I had the responsibility to translate. So this is the culmination of that journey. And finally, when I prepared this extended edition, I included other texts that belong to Miyamoto Musashi. So this book in Turkish became one of the few attempts to bring Musashi's text all together in one book, in one publication. So let's talk about the Book of Five Rings. I will give some quotes whenever necessary, so that you may have an idea of what he's talking. Because if you look at this book superficially, you will find a book of Iaijutsu, let's say, or Batto Jutsu, as they say. That means the techniques of using your sword. But that's only the beginning. That's only a scratch in what he's trying to tell us. How do we understand that? We understand that by doubting from the beginning. Now, well, okay, I have, put some different languages, all these languages and many others, believe me, his book is translated. He is one of the most important strategists in the world. His books are used in Harvard Business School, or in Columbia, in Oxford, in Cambridge, or in Sorbonne, especially in the business administration and leadership-related courses. Not only in military, general staff academies, but also in leadership-related courses, along with Sun Tzu. So, Turkish, our language, deserved another translation. Now, let's see in the first page of his book how he introduces himself. He says, I'm quoting, I am a samurai born in Harima province, that is Hyogo province, which is the area including Kobe. My name is Shinmen Musashi no Kami Fujiwara no Harunobu. So you see that his full name is larger than only Miyamoto Musashi. I have reached the age of 60 when he started writing this text in 1643 in a cave. He started living in seclusion in a cave and started writing these texts there. And there he was at the age of 60. He says, I have wandered all around the country and confronted many masters of various schools of strategy, dueled for 60 times and never once lost the upper hand. These happened between 13 and 28 or 29 years of age. After 30, I looked back and realized that I hadn't won those victories due to my maturity in art of war. Then, with the hope of reaching the profound meaning of the way, I worked nonstop, day and night, and I was 50 when I met the way of the art of war naturally. Since then, without having a way to look for, I am living shadow and light. So he has reached his truth. And now, before passing away, he is determined to relate, he is determined to transfer his thinking, his experience, as compact as possible to the new generations. Because after writing this, he will get sick. Now, he was sick, he knew that he was sick when he went there. But after a short period of sickness, he would die within 2 years in 1645. His follower, he left his texts to his follower, his disciple, Terao Magonojo, and thanks to him, we know about Miyamoto Musashi's texts because he had protected them, he has copied them, Terao Magonojo. But according to him, it seems that Miyamoto Musashi died a warrior's death. In many sources, we come across a scene that shows Musashi dying, sitting, his sword in one of his hands, and his walking stick or a stick in the other, and dying, as a dignant warrior. Now, he has divided his book into 5 chapters after the 5 elements that are used in Buddhism. But unlike the 5 elements generally used in Confucian China, he prefers a rather minor or a rather unorthodox, let's say, representation of 5 elements. What I mean by that is that the chapter names are ground, water, fire, wind, and void. Normally, you may find, in the other 5 elements, you may find wood and metal instead of some others here, right? Like ground and void, if I'm not mistaken. It is also popular. I mean, the other 5 elements is popular too, but it is well known too. But I think there is a reason, there is a purpose in Musashi's division of his chapters. You know why I started doubting? Because of the very name that is used for his book. It is the 5 rings. the Book of Five Rings. But he's not talking about rings. He's talking about elements. And a tower that is shaped like this, that is designed like this, that you will come across when you enter a Buddhist, most of the Buddhist temples. Most people ignore it. They don't realize it. They don't, they don't notice this little tower in the entrances of many temples, but it's there, and it's a strong symbol. When you look into the symbolism that is represented by this tower, you will find various, not circles, by the way, not circles, but various geometric shapes. The lowest part, well, it is the ground, is in rectangular shape, which is a stable shape, difficult to move, right? And second is round. It stands for water, which is soft and, flowing. And a pyramid for fire, which is fiery and violent. In that sense, pyramid is, a strong, but let's say, again, quite strong, with a strong and stable basis, but it's changing while going upwards. And the third one, the fourth one is the wind, and it is symbolized by, well, it is not that easy to understand it from here, but it is mainly a half moon. It's a round, but soft structure there. And finally, on top, we have the almond shape that stands for the void. So it is full with symbolism. And it is in parallel with what Miyamoto Musashi wants to tell in this book. He is not only talking about sword fencing. He is giving hints about life, about leadership, about being the meaning of being a samurai, but also a human being. Now, he says, at the very start of his text, he says, strategy is the craft of the warriors. Sorry. Commanders must implement this art and soldiers must know. So his way of telling about the Bushido, the way of the samurai, according to Musashi, the main principles for those who want to enter his way that he puts forth is 9. Be straight in your thoughts, work with all your might, experience various arts and crafts, learn the ways of various professions, differentiate between merit and demerit in everything, know how to tell good and bad in all situations. Remember, the first Confucian virtues, the gi, that is morality, and to know the good and bad, or the right and wrong, everything. Understand the invisible by feeling it. Attend even the smallest detail. Do nothing meaningless. I have experienced various sides and facades of this teaching when I lived and worked with and get acquainted with my Japanese friends, Japanese people. Somehow, these rules were like a part of their DNA. I cannot say DNA, but it is taught, of course, to the Japanese people by the mass education system, and at the core of which lies Bushido. Now, the ground. Now, what does ground stand for? People say in conferences, because I mean, I cannot see you, and you cannot give feedback. But normally, when we do it in the good times, in normal times, when I give a talk, I ask them, "What does ground stand? You think?" They generally say, nature, giving birth, source of life, etc. Another interpretation is also possible. Ground is the solid platform, solid basis that we stand on. So without the ground, we cannot move forward. If there is no solid platform that we stand on, we cannot move forward. We would just, float in vacuum. Just imagine that you would be in space without a solid ground under your feet. You would float like it. Okay. That's why he means by ground, or the whole 5 elements theory gives by ground, for that matter, is what you stand on. That is your history. That is your personal or national history. You have to know who you are, your identity, for that matter. You have to know who you are and what you want to do with your life. That's why in the ground book, he outlines everything he will tell in his book. It is the very start. It is the solid basis. So in his book, I think he makes a very critical, let's say, he uses a metaphor for leadership. These 2 kanjis, daiku, in Japanese it means carpenter, and Musashi in his book likens carpentry to leadership or commandership, because he says it means the grand craft. A carpenter should know his own craft, let's say, all the details of his design. He would be able to know how to design. He would know how a temple should be made, how a house should be designed, etc. And then he would hire and bring together talented people, give jobs, assign jobs in accordance with their talents, and coordinate their efforts, and know his material, like, which types of wood should be used in the entrances, in the doors, in the gates, in the ceilings, in all kinds of parts of the architecture. And then you will have a building that will last for long, he says. He knows, surprisingly, all detailed terminology of carpentry. And he says leadership or commandership or being a samurai is to know the grand craft. That is daiku. So, for Musashi, as written in his book, in the ground book chapter, the characteristics of a leader is as follows: to take action decisively, to advance orderly, to do nothing sloppily, to know what really matters, to realize the ups and downs in people's spirit and encourage them or motivate them whenever necessary, to know what is impossible. These are the characteristics of a leader, he says. This is the essence of art of war. So now, he is not talking about only sword fencing. You start to realize that this book is more about the philosophy of leadership, or of being successful, or to have consistent, sustainable success in your life, or in your endeavor, or in your enterprise. Now, he says, on whichever way you walk, if you master your craft to a level second to none, you will glorify your name. This is the way of strategy. Don't you think, like me, that this is the roadmap to creating a brand. Own your name if you want your name to be a brand, but your product or service or whatever you name it, or a concept like Bushido, a concept like samurai, the same thing. It becomes a brand. So the second chapter is called water. And he says at the entrance of this chapter, water is fluid. It flows. It can become a small, tiny drop of water. It's a small drop, but it can also become an ocean. The water takes the shape of the vehicle it uses, it goes into, or the form it takes. So water symbolizes flexibility, fluidity. What do we understand from that? We understand that we should be flexible like water. He tells it in his book. He says, fixation is death. One who moves lives. This is a military principle, of course, to be active and, proactive and be in the move all the time. But also, it is a hint for our life. I mean, I have been to several strategy-related consulting projects in various industrial facilities and companies, together with my Japanese colleagues, and we saw there that there are people in companies who by time, of course, they start with active and energetic youth when they start their profession, but gradually they become fixed. They don't want to move any further. They don't want to change their ideas. They are close to new ideas. And that's why they cause their companies to falter. Because if you don't adapt yourself to changing conditions and times, you will falter. It is the same for individuals. Think about it. How curious are you? How curious are people around you? How curious is this nation, this society? How curious is Middle East? I mean, I'm kidding. Let me tell you, my conclusion is that if a person or a nation or a society loses curiosity, it will collapse. I mean, not literally, but gradually. It doesn't happen at once, but you can visualize in your eyes. In the Middle Ages, Middle East was the source of science, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, you name it. Now, after following the Crusades, this curiosity was taken or inherited by European peoples, the West, and that curiosity led to the age of discoveries, Renaissance, reforms, and etc., and the development of the West, if you like. Now, Asia, the East, is attaining curiosity, and it's rising. Japan was the first in Asian nations to develop, because starting with the Meiji Restoration, the samurai were so curious of the world. They went all around the world and learned the local languages, and they collected knowledge like sponges, intellectual sponges. The sponges attract water. So fixation is death, he says. If you have the power of knowledge, you can see the secrets of each and every environment So I quoted this because he's using power of knowledge concept here. I think he is pointing out to a certain fact. Knowledge is power. He knows it. Okay. The next chapter is the book of fire. And he says, I will write the battlefield here. What will happen during the fight itself? Because the fire is violent as the war, the battle itself is. And if you cannot control fire, it will destroy you. So to control yourself during the battle is possible only by preparation. He says, he uses the word so many times, preparation for preparation, tanren, kunren, renshu, different words. And he says, practice, 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 practice. The second word he uses most is think. Think about this. Think about this. Rethink about this. You have to think about this. So he says, I see many people who undermine the value of thinking, but those are destined to lose. If you don't think, you will lose. So thoughts are important too. Like water, the fire also takes different shapes. If you control it, you can use it for your own good, but it can also, like wildfires, destroy you or what you have prepared. So you have to get ready. He says in this book, if you have to die, you must die with all your weapons exhausted. Is it all right to die with your swords on your belly? Are you all right with this? Will you pass your life without realizing your true whole potential? Will you wait for another day or for some, miracle to happen? He uses this for the battle. I mean, nothing is miraculous. No miracles happen in the battles or duels, for that matter. You have to be prepared to win. Without preparation, nobody, including God, will not help you to win. So you must use all your weapons, all your energy, everything in your power to win in your struggles. Today, if you can win against your yesterday self, I love this quote. If you can win against your yesterday self, tomorrow you can beat novices, and later, the other day, you will beat masters. So he wants to mean, the real fight is against yourself. It is not about others. I mean, if you look at the famous champions, record breakers, you will see that they fight against themselves. They don't care about what others do. They don't, compete with them. They compete with themselves. This is what Musashi tells us. So the fourth book is The Wind. He says, the wind brings odors, smells, or sounds, voices from afar. That's why we should know and learn more about others, he says, other styles and schools. Because he says, one who knows not the others will now know not himself or herself. You have to know others. So in this book, he starts to tell the ways of other sword fencing or strategy schools in details. He knows each and every detail of each and every school of fight, because he knows that one day or another, that person may become your opponent. And if you know his ways, you can win. You don't have to, not necessarily fight, but to know gives you the power of knowledge. So he says, beware, any tiny deviation from your way today will evolve into a large deviation by time. Wanting and excess in all things are the same. He repeats this word every now and then. He advises balance in one's deeds, and advises to evade excesses. Okay, the final book. I was surprised when I first read it. This book is only a page, and this chapter is written by Miyamoto Musashi, and it is only the length of a page, very small, a few paragraphs. His message is there again. He says, if you manage to come this far, understand what I mean, you don't need much more. You will understand what I mean in a few sentences. You will derive your meanings yourself. So, by the way, void is, as you know, is not only void. It is the complementing part, element of all things in universe. I mean, space, like the atom, electrons, neurons, but there is space, there is emptiness, there is void in between them, but it is not non-existent, as he says at the start of this chapter. He says, void is that anything is extant, is in fact non-extant. Therefore, naturally, void is non-extant too. If you know the extant, you can understand the extinct, and by time, you will understand the meaning of void. I mean, it is poetic. And at the end of this chapter, one page, he literally gives a small poem telling all what he wants to tell. I will not quote that. Maybe you will read this one day. I don't want to give you a spoiler. But I think that page is fascinating. And he says, ones who grasp the true meaning of the way can distance themselves from it. So once you master your craft, wherever you walk is the way. Whatever you do is the way. You can distance as you like yourself to the way as known to others. They move on the way of strategy with innate freedom and reach a natural but mysterious for others uniqueness. That word, I think, summarizes his message, uniqueness. He was after uniqueness. I came to that conclusion. Well, after my first publication, the first version of my translation, while preparing the extended version, the new one, I realized that there is a stress, there is an underlining effort in the word uniqueness. That's why I also included his 21 precepts called the Kodo. This is also famous in the martial arts circles, and it is generally translated into English as the path of aloneness, the way to go forth alone, or the way of walking alone. Or lead, or you name it. But such a genius as Musashi does not summarize his purpose in with the words being alone. Did we are walking alone, to be alone, aloneness? No, there must have been something different, I thought. And in my first translation, I translated this dokkodo into Turkish, if I reverse translated it in English, as the way to independence. Because this word also can mean independence. So it's more intelligible now. He's talking about, I thought, to be independent, not being alone. I mean, you can be with people, but you can be independent. That's something else. Like this word is used, this kanji is used for dokuritsu senso, the war of independence, like for example, Turkish independence, led by Atatürk. So it can be translated as independence, which is, more suitable for me. But while preparing the next version, as I said, I, started suspecting myself because the same word can be translated as uniqueness. Dokuji. I, put this version as the way to uniqueness. He is talking about becoming unique. Yes, he was talking about becoming unique. His works, when you look at them, his sumie works, his calligraphy, his sculpture, his designs, his sayings, he's after uniqueness. He wanted to leave a unique path behind. And I'm so fascinated with his approach. He's talking about, I was thinking he was talking about strategic leadership, but now I'm convinced that he's talking about creative leadership. Creative leadership, the unity of arts of war and peace. That's why I established, going after, hopefully, Musashi's path, the School of Creative Leadership. I gave it name, Musashi Dojo. I want to spread this idea of both perfecting your own craft, whatever you do. I mean, we don't have to have swords in our hands or weapons in our hands, and we are not after fighting with anybody. The real fight is with ourselves, but we have to perfect our own craft, but also learn arts of peace, that is art. So calligraphy, I find uniting the two sides. That's why I call our slogan in Musashi Dojo is brush is the sword of mind. It is actually the terminology that is used for brush. You would be surprised how it is related with weapons. I mean, but that's the content of another maybe webinar. So, well, let me wrap it up. It was a long journey for me, but it was full with discoveries, and it was enjoyable. Japan gave me a target, and with a target, you're stronger. I don't know if it was coincidental or it was, let's say, it was my fate. As Musashi is telling in his own book, he says, I don't know if I was lucky until I was 30. I mean, I was victorious. I did many things, but I don't know if it was luck or not. But, after 50, he realized that the way to walk was clear to him after he was 50, he says. I feel, something similar, for my enjoyment. I feel that after 50, I found the real way I was looking for, and that is the Book of Five Rings and Miyamoto Musashi's symbolic depictions he in his original text. So that's my proposal for English translation, the Vedic uniqueness. So if you read this book, you will come again and again, you will read this book once and again and again and again, and you will underline more as you read along. It is such an interesting book. So this is just two visuals I chose for as the end slide. On the right, there is a samurai, but on the left, there is a janissary. I don't know how many are Turkish nationals listening to us, but I would like to ask you, do you know if there is a code of the janissaries? Do you know yourself? Do you know your own history? As Musashi says, is your ground solid? Well, thank you for listening and having me today, Aiko Sensei.
Thank you so much again for a very fruitful talk. Let me unmute everybody in case if you want to, if you have any questions to Professor Kuchuk Yalchun. Burak?
So, like last week's presentation, this week's presentation by Dr. Küçük Yalçın is very, informative and comprehensive. My question is about the sort of, modern sort of uses of Musashi's, understanding of leadership by, let's say, Japanese companies. Dr. Küçük Yalçın mentioned the use of this material in places like Harvard Business School, and he also mentioned that many institutions of Japan have continued to refer to that source. So I would like to just request a bit more elaboration on that. In what respects, let's say, Japanese companies and which companies, make use of such material, whether the references to, these leadership qualities also changed over time, whether one aspect became more emphasized than the other, and so on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think it's a very good question. Well, let me try to answer it like this. As you said, the understanding of Bushido changes like every other concept by time, that's for sure. But the teaching itself is there, and the more you understand it and you apply it to your world, the more you receive the fruits of it. Let's say you harvest what you learned from these principles. That's how they are conceived in Japan or in other business circles around the world. That's why it is used as a educational material in some business administration schools and departments. But Japan does not necessarily, with all its aspects and parts, understand and implement and are aware of the teachings of Miyamoto Musashi, especially recently. In the old times, when I talk about Meiji or Taisho periods where Japan was, on the move and it was rising and, it was running towards success with a hungry spirit, they call it, then they were more aware of these teachings. And that's how they established many brands like Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Toyota, etc. On the one hand, of course, there are negative consequences of these teachings, and if they are used for, let's say, military purposes only, it led, this way of thinking was used by Japanese Army and Navy, and to disasters. It caused disasters in the Second World War, and Japan had to restart from scratch. But again, after the Second World War, there were managers, there were leaders who know their musashis and who taught them within their companies. By the way, let me remind you that in Japan, a normal education in secondary and high schools, and even in the universities themselves, have to be complemented with education and training after Japanese people enter into companies. So the large companies, they have their own discipline and way of thinking, and they have their worldview, let's say, in relation with their own brand and its image, under which lies, for most of them, Bushido, I believe, because their founders were whether Bushis themselves or admirers of Bushido or learners of Bushido, let's say. So in modern Japan, I mean, when coming to the answer for your question, in modern Japan, the training of Bushido for leadership is given within the companies for the leader candidates, management class candidates. So we don't know what's happening in each company, in each firm, but whenever I meet, as I said, a general manager and have a dinner and go to drinking and have chat with intimate chats with some of them, or other parts of management from academia, etc., I realize that they know their history of the samurai, and they're aware of the book of Five Rings, and they know to a certain extent. I mean, these things depend on your, as the Japanese say, on your utsuwa, your own depth and knowledge, and your own accumulation of knowledge. The more you know, the better you understand, obviously. So it depends on how much they know. Each person knows less or more. But anyhow, they're aware of Bushido and its precepts and principles. So I say the companies, they inherit and they continue these and they protect, they keep the secrets of, let's say, secrets of leadership in the business culture in Japan at the moment. There are books written about it for the managers, like Bushido for business, Bushido for management, leadership, Bushido for, I don't know, for you name it. I mean, all fields. Many books are written. Even now, I'm sure there are new books binding Bushido with leadership are published in Japan, but not only in Japan, in the United States, in England, in France, you find that. Bushido for leaders, many books titled like this. So it is there. It is continuing, but one maybe little addition to that, I don't see young people, young generations that interested in words like Bushido and fighting spirit, and they're more individualistic. They're more, they don't care much about the let's say the community, the society, our nation, and etc. Maybe they are wiser. I don't know. I mean, they're just different than my upbringing. So they're not that aware, but there are people who are interested. I gave a similar webinar to Japan a few weeks ago in Japanese. It was interesting experience for me, talking about Japanese history and samurai way of thinking to Japanese people in Japanese. I'm living my dream. You know, when I was a secondary school student, I would never imagine that, but it happened. So they are interested. They ask questions, but it's only a minority. So I don't know, Professor Gürel, if this is an answer for your question, or
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
okay. Well, thank you for your question.
And I think part of the popularity of Bushido nowadays is this, what Dr. Kuchuk mentioned, this at one part that I think there's this association from the militaristic part that it was used, especially wartime, and how it tied to nationalism and revering the empire. So that part of history is cut off, I think, and reinvented in the post-war period, and more seen as more of this business strategy, and keeping that essence of this moralistic, moral part of that Bushido, and cutting off the violent part might be why it's more accepted widely nowadays, even in Western countries. Now, I think, and also I really hope that this sort of subject will be, people would know more about this history, especially in Japan, because like you said, like I think especially for the young people, although Miyamoto Musashi remains an icon and you see him in like all these animes and games, I think it's so much more on a superficial level, and understanding that the history and the real, like the actual writing of him and the artwork also will give much deeper understanding. So I hope you will give more lectures to the Japanese people as well. And I know you have a class after this, so I think we should end the webinar for now. But thank you again for giving such interesting talks. And I hope you will have we'll have another chance to learn more about your work in the future. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for this enjoyable environment, and I hope, yes, we will, do another talk later on. Well, I'm ready to cooperate and work together. All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Yes, I look forward to that. Thank you.